And we are live. Welcome to Crypto Law TV. I'm John Deaton, the founder and your host. And we're going to talk next week about this motion. I'm in New York City. I'm in a hotel room in New York City. We're going to go to the Coinbase motion to dismiss tomorrow. But let's bring on a very good friend of the show and crypto's number one journalist as far as John Deaton and crypto law is concerned. Welcome, Ellie.
Thank you, John. I was going to say that's the title you gave me, and I'm very grateful that you did. So thank you for that. I haven't had a chance to thank you in person.
Well, let's just say I believe that the founder of crypto law is the person most knowledgeable and who is the best crypto law journalist. So I deem it so. It is the way it is. So let's talk. Last week, right? Yes. 1 hour before we were doing our crypto law live stream, me and crypto law. And right after that show, news broke, and the SEC, from what I understand, and we're going to talk about it, violated its own cybersecurity rules and got hacked. And so related to the approval of the spot Bitcoin ETFs. So what were your thoughts on it, how it went down, and tell us a little bit from your perspective as a journalist, what it was like behind the scenes?
Well, behind the scenes, it was completely chaotic. And I'm not just talking about the hack. Obviously, that was unprecedented. But I'm also talking about the little flub with the document when it was supposed to come out after market hours. I think it was around 3:57. The SEC dropped the 19B4 approvals, but that was early. So what they did is they dropped the document. All those super fast accounts on Twitter picked it up, put it out, said SEC has approved, Gary Gensler has approved the 11 Bitcoin spot ETFs. And, we're like, okay, we saw this yesterday. Take it with a grain of salt. Let's actually look at the document and make sure it's real. It was real. But then about 5 seconds later, the SEC took the document down. And I think it was because someone at the SEC had a fat finger or the website crashed. But it really wasn't even, you couldn't even access. It wasn't like a slow spinning wheel of death. You couldn't actually, it came up with a 404 error, which would, it kind of looks like they took it down. So talk about complete chaos, right? We've got Charlie on the air breaking this thing because it had just come out right before his hit. He was talking on Liz Clayman's show. And I've got the producers in my ear saying, Ellie, we can't access the website. Are you sure this is real? And I'm like, no, it's definitely real. I saw it a second ago. And it was, how live TV goes, but it was just a real miracle that it wasn't a hack. It ended up being the truth. And Charlie was actually the first one to break it on air. So that was very cool. But let's rewind to the hack. That was just, I don't think anyone in journalism, in crypto world, on crypto Twitter, even, everyday people who have dealt with the SEC, companies, public companies, they're like, I just saw so many comments on Twitter, people just saying, how does this happen? And like you said, it not only it moved markets, first of all, it moved the price of Bitcoin, but it also, it broke about 1 million cybersecurity laws. And the ironic part is that the SEC put out new rules for public companies. Now, this is not, it's ironic because it's like rules for thee and not for me. So these are not rules that the SEC follows because they're an agency, right? They're not a public company. But in the SEC report, in the Inspector General's report back in 2021, I remember we covered this. I think you and I talked about it, John. We talked about it quite extensively. It was a pretty scathing report. The Inspector General said Gary Gensler, he wasn't a fan of the way Gary Gensler was running the SEC. He brought up there were problems with the rulemaking practices. And in there was also references to cybersecurity, how the SEC could beef up its cybersecurity protections. So there's that. There's also an executive order that the White House gave in May of 2021, instructing all federal agencies to turn on two-factor authentication. So you've got all these rules that were just ignored, or, if the account really was hacked, they got through. We know it was a two-factor authentication problem. So the fact that it wasn't turned on is pretty crazy. And I know you probably have a lot to say on the subject too, John.
Well, listen, we're going to talk about Gary Gensler, the Inspector General, and the way he's running the SEC. You have people in the community that have been less critical than me. I've been a critic of the SEC from the very moment I read that complaint where they were saying the underlying asset was a security, which had been the same as saying the beavers were securities when beavers were used, or the chinchillas, or the condos, or the orange groves, or the oranges. So I've been angry at the SEC and the way it's hurt individual retail investors from day one. So when John Deaton criticized the SEC, it's a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, and every day week. But you're having lawyers who hold the SEC more in esteem than I do. They believe in the agency and they believe in the institution much more than I do. And they're coming out saying that it has to be reformed and that the way Gary Gensler is running the SEC is not more than negligent. It's almost criminal the way he's doing it. But let's go back to the ETFs, because something else happened in this last week is you see this division of fintech world and traditional finance, because Vanguard, which by happens to coincidentally manage 90% of Gary Gensler's 120 million personal fortune. I digress, but let me just throw that out there. Vanguard came out and said, we're not allowing spot ETFs on our platform. And their biggest competitor is BlackRock, and BlackRock is all in. We're going to talk about your and Charlie's dealings with Larry Fink here in a minute. But I guess my question to you is, do you think it sticks? Do you think the Vanguards of the world are going to hold their nose, deny customers what they want, or do you think they eventually will give in?
I don't think it's going to be a forever move by Vanguard. I think eventually they're going to see other benefits to offering this kind of product to their customers, to their clients. I think they can't hold out forever. They might hold out for a little bit, or maybe as long as they can. But I've seen reports and been able to confirm a few, at least, individually on an individual client basis, that a lot of people have been calling Vanguard and saying, I want exposure to the new Bitcoin spot ETFs. And Vanguard has said, actually, we're not going to provide that at this time. That at the discretion of Vanguard, right? I think a lot of these managers have to do their due diligence on new ETFs, right? Look how they trade. There's not too much crazy volatility, or investors going to benefit from this, or our clients going to benefit from this. But then we heard, and actually Vanguard said themselves, that they were going to pull out of offering the futures part of Bitcoin exposure. So, that's been around since 2021. I'm not sure how long Vanguard itself crypto completely. I think that is more of a political statement than just, BlackRock's doing it, so we're not going to do it. But if you look at Vanguard's history, it was founded by Bogle, and he was not a fan of commodities. He was much more of a stock guy. I think there was a quote that he said, commodities don't give you the same kind of return that stocks do, because commodities are based on the market performance and stocks are based on the performance of the companies. So I think there's a little bit of institutional loyalty there to their founder. Vanguard's very focused on the small investors. They don't want these risky, volatile assets that could potentially, I guess, hurt their clients in their view. But then, on the other hand of that, on the other side, you've got Larry Fink of BlackRock, the #1 asset manager in the world with over 9 trillion. Actually, I think it's a 10 trillion as of their latest acquisition and their latest earnings call. They are $10 trillion in assets now. So the biggest money manager in the world, headed by a guy who was a Bitcoin skeptic for a long time, right? All he would say about Bitcoin was that it was used for money laundering and illicit purposes. He still believes that some activity is used for that using Bitcoin, but concedes that a lot of other things are also used for that kind of thing, like banking and cash. So we can get on to what he said to Charlie in the Friday interview in a minute, but he's totally done a 180 on that. I think that is quite something to behold, and the crypto community loves it. I mean, they're hanging on Larry Fink's every word. 5 years ago, you said the name Larry Fink, maybe 6 out of 10 crypto people knew who that was. And now everybody knows who Larry Fink is.
Well, first of all, everybody should know that they have between 10 and 11 trillion dollars under management. It makes them the largest asset manager in the world. So certainly when Larry Fink speaks, people are going to listen. But I got to tell you something, and I'm going to try not to get too much on my soapbox right now, but this thought of Vanguard or the government saying, well, we deem this asset too risky for regular people is something that's a thorn in my side for my existence. You know, I wasn't an accredited investor until I was in my late 40s. And I'm sure in 1980 in Massachusetts, they wouldn't let regular people watching this show purchase Apple computer stock. And just so you know, 100 shares of Apple stock bought in 1980 makes you a millionaire today. But they have to protect us from wealth. That's what they're doing. We're not going to get any further than that, but it's something that Vanguard should be ashamed of themselves. People have the right to invest in the assets that they deem best for them and their families. But with that,
I think it also speaks to the fact that, yes, the government, the SEC, Gary Gensler has signed off on these products, but traditional Wall Street, those guys who, you know, have been around a long time, don't necessarily believe in Bitcoin and what it stands for, don't believe in democratic forms of wealth, right? Don't have to say yes to it. It's all about how the private industry takes it. So I think we'll continue to see some battles over incorporation, like how traditional Wall Street takes it. You know, even though the SEC has blessed it.
With you and, you know, I know you and Charlie are behind the scenes. You're talking to Larry Fink, obviously, that we'll talk about in a minute. I don't know if you guys are reaching out to the Vanguards of the world to try to get why they're so adamant. I think that would be great if you guys did. But do you have any predictions about what the new ETF news will be? Are we going to see in 180 from these others? Or is there something else that you're working on that you can share with us?
Well, I keep getting asked what I think about the odds of an Ethereum ETF getting approved now that we have a Bitcoin spot ETF up and running. And I think you'll agree with me, John, just from covering the Ripple case, looking at all these statements that Gary Gensler has made before being chair and after being chair, how he feels about Ethereum is very unclear. So I don't think allowing a Bitcoin spot ETF.
All right, we may have
got the floodgates open, and you know, Ethereum will get. Oh, can you still hear me?
No, you just froze up a little bit. Let me ask you this: do you see anything behind the scenes? Gary Gensler has rained havoc on crypto from the moment that he became chairman. He testified that Coinbase and other exchanges, you know, they fell in this regulatory gap. They weren't governed by the SEC or the CFTC. Now he believes that he's in charge of everything. Do you see any of that changing from what you're hearing behind the scenes? Or are you with me where we're just going to see more of that during this election year?
Yes. If you can hear me and I didn't freeze up, I'm with you. I think we're going to see more of enforcement crackdown by the SEC. I don't think just because Gary had pressure to approve these Bitcoin spot ETFs from Larry Fink, from Wall Street, but also from the courts, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it was—
He had no choice. He had no choice.
Yeah, he had no choice. He had no choice. And I don't think that necessarily means anything's going to change. I mean, I think it's a step in the right direction. It's definitely positive. But long term, I think under Gary Gensler, the SEC is still going to be very much anti-crypto.
Okay, but what about the hack? We've got Senator Loomis, Senator Wyden. They're coming out. They're saying that the Inspector General needs to investigate this. Is Gensler going to even be held accountable for the hack and the negligence there, in your opinion?
Well, I actually just put out a tweet on this very subject, not necessarily involving Gary, but we know that just looking at old SEC documents, actually from their budget justification from last year, that it's the Office of Public Affairs that deals with and actually handles the social media posting. So from an agency perspective, I think it's very much, you know, as Gary Gensler as the figurehead of the SEC, yes, it's very much on him. But from a personal standpoint, I don't think even congressmen who really want to go after him for this, I don't think they have much of a case in saying that Gary Gensler was the one that did this and let this happen. He wasn't the one that, I guess, had his thumb on the button. I mean, right. Not that we know of anyway. I'm not sure if we'll ever find out exactly who, but you know, I think there's going to be like we've seen, right? A lot of letters, a lot of hearings, a lot of questions, but not necessarily any action.
All right. Speaking of letters, let me ask you, do you have any insight talking behind the scenes, because I know you all reach out to these politicians and I know they talk to you off the record. I'm not asking you to violate anything like that. But I got to tell you, I know I speak from my audience when I say that if I see another angry, firmly worded letter, I'm going to lose my effing mind, right? And that if I don't see a subpoena coming from Patrick McHenry, if there's another letter, a stern letter, I'm just telling you that it's going to cause people to go insane. And just for while I'm thinking of it, because we're talking about Congress, I want to highlight that on cryptolaw.us, if you go there, there's a connect to Congress button. We have formed basically a demand that Patrick McHenry issue that subpoena. And I want people to go to it because we've only got 1,000 messages, and I would assume that we'd have had 10,000 by now. I know some people out there don't think it makes a difference, but I tell you, it does make a difference. It did before, and you can do it again. So just demand the subpoena. Go to Connect to Congress. That's on Crypto Law. Sorry, Elliot, I wanted to get that out, but I'm frustrated because I don't understand why it takes so long to issue the damn subpoena. And do you have any insights on why it's all this nonsense of threats and threats and threats and never no action?
Only insight from kind of what I can gather from staffers. So, I not that I know that there's any movement on a subpoena. I think the House Financial Services Committee is very frustrated with Gary, obviously, because he doesn't answer questions. And clearly they've made the point several times in hearings that he doesn't answer letters either, or any kind of substantial information that they ask for. So they're frustrated. I think making a subpoena or subpoenaing him is a big political statement. I don't know who, aside from potentially Gary, if any other SEC chairs have been subpoenaed for information for technically withholding it from Congress. So it would be a first, at least a first in a very long time, as far as I'm aware. So I think they're just giving him as many chances as possible. I mean, that was him so many chances, and there's so many letters. So I think we'll. Ooh, did I?
No, it's fine. Let me spell it out for the congressman, okay? It's called SEC oversight. You are sitting on a committee and you are providing oversight of the SEC. When you took an oath as a U.S. congressman or a U.S. senator and you sit on that committee, it is your job to provide oversight. It is your job to subpoena this guy when he sticks his middle finger at every letter that you send. So do your job.
Also, don't forget that right now the Senate is still controlled by the Democrats. So maybe if we see a flip in Congress in 2024, this year in elections, then subpoena action will be, maybe more subpoena action will be sought. I don't.
Right.
I mean, a split Congress.
Right. Let me ask you, is there, I don't believe there's any chance for legislation in 2024. I know some people think there's stable coin legislation. I believe it's an election year. People are going to go to their respective tribes and not do their job as U.S. senators and U.S. congressmen. That's what my belief is. Do you have any other beliefs based on what you're hearing behind the scenes?
I think if anything, we could see a stablecoin bill, even maybe the crypto market structure bill, move out of the House because it moved out of committee. So those are the two headlines from last summer, right? Both of those bills moved out of committee. They have to have a full vote on it for the House floor. So I could see maybe that happening. I don't see it going through the Senate, and I don't see it getting passed this year. And very little action, if any, because you're right. It's a presidential election year. Everybody's focused on that. There's stuff coming up in Congress. You've got the debt ceiling. You've got other issues. Congressmen find more pressing. I know that we've got a couple of chariots of fire in the industry who pioneer, I guess, crypto legislation. Patrick McHenry, French Hill. But at the end of the day, there are a lot more pressing issues on their desks to deal with. So I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see really much movement at all this year.
Right. I tried to explain to people that when Senator Warren put out her crypto bill, anti-money laundering bill, it's really a banker's ban on Bitcoin. Let's call it the bill, the proper title that it deserves. Banker's ban on crypto, on Bitcoin and crypto in the United States. But I was explaining to people, crypto it's not a top 10 issue for people in America, and they need
Right.
to understand it. It might be a big issue for crypto folks, but for regular people, it's just not a big deal to them, right? They're more worried about inflation and housing prices and education costs and all those, immigration going out of control, those things.
Correct.
So, but let's in the few minutes that we got left of the show, I want to talk about Larry Fink. And I want to talk about the interview because, I thought that was a big grab that you and Charlie were able to get for Liz on the show. And like I said, he's the number one asset manager in the world. And so it's very important. And I thought Charlie, he even brought up XRP, and asked a question that we'll talk about. So what did you take away briefly from that conversation the most? Because I know you helped put it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of my favorite takeaways, we actually got the timeline on when Larry Fink changed his mind about Bitcoin, right? It was 2017, 2018. He came out and said it's a vehicle for money laundering. There are articles all over CNBC, right? And then he said 3 years ago. So that would be 2020, like late 2020, early 2021. So we actually know when he changed his tune. And it's because he told us directly. It's because he came around to a different way of thinking. He saw the utility. He didn't see it as just some speculative asset that I think most of traditional Wall Street sees it as. He saw the use case for it, and he even talked about it in the interview. He said, if you're worried about your government devaluing your currency, if you're worried about government overreach in your country, then Bitcoin is a potential store of value for you. And so, I don't think we'd ever have dreamed that Larry Fink, Gary Gensler definitely not, Larry Fink would come out and say something like that and just literally attest to the entire reason Bitcoin was born in the first place, right? It's very cool. So that was my favorite part of the interview. So we kind of got that timeline. He also said, he admitted, because Charlie asked him the question, he goes, but at the end of the day, like, isn't it just a ledger? And Fink said it is a ledger, but it's an international ledger. It's cross-border and it's bigger than any government. So he's literally conceding that, this it outstrips the US government, it outstrips the Chinese government, any other government, right? It's bigger than that. So
Right.
basically saying like the people are bigger than any government and any government control is what I got from that.
Right. So, let's talk real quick. Larry Fink brought up an ETF for Ethereum, and I know there's a lot of XRP holders that's gonna rub them, wrong, and a lot of people because of ETHgate and all of those things. And there was a good exchange on X today with attorney Joe Colasari, very good person to follow. And this issue of the ETH ETF came up, and Joe pointed out that the 5-year statute of limitations for a Section 5 unregistered securities offering has expired. And so the statute of limitations have expired. Now, the statute of limitations for fraud, right, for a fraudulent conveyance securities offering was extended to 10 years. And basically that would expire this year. And so the bottom line is, regardless if it angers people or whatever, the fact that an ETH futures has been granted and is in operation, they're going to follow the same playbook that Grayscale did. And they're going to say, grant us an ETH future, an ETH spot ETF. And if the SEC says no, then they're going to say, well, we're going to sue you just like Grayscale did, because you granted the futures and you can't, there's no rationale that explains why you would grant the futures and not the spot. And it's just the same blueprint. And so most likely we're going to see an Ethereum ETF, in my opinion, unless somehow Gary Gensler, before the end of this year, decides to file some kind of fraud case, a decade later. And I just don't see it happening, whether it's deserved or whatever people's opinion is. I focus on reality and facts. And I don't believe it's going to happen. And therefore, I believe an ETH ETF will be granted. I'll get your opinion on that. But also, there was news because Larry Fink said he couldn't comment on XRP. There's no doubt that Larry Fink is aware of what XRP is, what it's used for, the fact that it was the third largest cryptocurrency in the world, the fact that Ripple got sued, the fact that there's a result. He's going to be looking at these. And so there's a lot of speculation of why he said that or the way he said it. You know how people parch every word someone says, and he just said he can't comment on it. Any thoughts you can share on any of that I just shared with people?
Yeah, what you brought up from Joe, I think that's a really interesting point. I didn't realize that the fraud statute of limitations runs out this year. It's something I'd like to read up more on, but I tend to agree with you that, if we were going to see anything from Gary Gensler on Ethereum at this point, I think we would have maybe seen something or heard something from him already. As in, if there's an Ethereum futures ETF, then I think it's safe to say that, at least they think that ETH has the potential to be a commodity. Issue with the new system that ETH runs on now, and whether the staking, whether that is indeed a security, whether that counts as a security. I think we're going to see that brought up in the Coinbase case as well, because I believe the SEC is dinging them for staking as well. So there's no real precedent there right now. I don't know if I think the Ethereum futures will come under Gensler. I mean, I could see it happening because having obviously the futures ETF already, but he's just so unsure about calling Ethereum what it is or what it isn't. Right? Is it a security? Is it a commodity? He won't say outright. So I think we're just gonna have to watch for more cues from the SEC. But I think that's a great point to make. Whether the ICO was fraudulent, could you come out, maybe this year and make some kind of enforcement action about it? I guess you maybe could. It would be very interesting to watch.
Listen, it would require, and I know that there are people working on this, and there's the DAO hack issue, and there's on-chain evidence that Boring Sleuth has shown or has alleged that, and if it's on chain, it's on chain. If you can show it, you can show it, or you can't. And so I'm not discounting any of that. I'm just saying is that it would require Gary Gensler to go against the Larry Finks of the world who are already pushing for it. And I'm just saying that the clock is ticking. And unless there is some kind of overwhelming pressure on Gensler and the SEC to pursue a fraud case, it's most likely not going to happen. And I'm just trying to always be realistic with people. If I'm proven wrong, I'm proven wrong, but it's going to take, I think something overwhelming, and you could have overwhelming proof, but that doesn't mean that these people will do it, because we know the truth doesn't guide them and justice doesn't guide them. These are insiders. They're political hacks. They allow regulatory capture to go on constantly. The SEC, it doesn't have a revolving door, right? No more, because a revolving door assumes that it closes sometime. It is just these regulators are going from, Clayton, basically Kushner gets his loan from Apollo Group, and then the SEC drops the case against Apollo Group, and then not Gary Gensler, Jay Clayton becomes director of Apollo Group, right? And I could go on with all the other examples that happen. I don't want to get upset right now, but I just want the viewers to know that I want justice and I want the truth out, but we're faced with these people who don't give a shit about the truth. And they don't care about justice, and they don't care about free markets in a level playing field. All they care about is their pockets. I'm sick of it. Other people are sick of it, but I'll give you the last word and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, you said it. I mean, they're bureaucrats at the end of the day. They serve terms. They're here for a certain amount of time, at least at the SEC, not necessarily in Congress, because you can last until you're in your 90s, apparently. But with the federal agencies, you typically you serve a term, and Gary's term is up in 2026. If the Biden administration stays the Biden administration and we don't get a switch in Congress, then Gary will likely be in that position unless he steps down. But I don't see that happening, until 2026. That's 2 years from now. If we get a Republican win in the House, in the White House, and we get a flip, then you could expect to see someone more aligned with whoever's in the White House is, thinking along the federal regulations line. So I think a lot of it comes down to how this election is going to turn out. Obviously, that's what everybody's watching right now. It's gonna decide a lot of things.
Absolutely. All right, Ellie, thank you. Went a couple minutes over, but it's always a pleasure. Next week, we'll talk about the Coinbase motion to dismiss and what goes down tomorrow in Judge Value's courtroom. Until then, everybody have a great week.
Thanks, John.